Prisoners of War, explosive arcade action. And welcome to Nostalgia, a chronological exploration of every NES game released in North America. I'm Mike.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Joe.
Guys, SNK back at it again with another arcade port, aka their bread and butter, but we haven't seen them in a minute. The last game they released was Baseball Stars. I'll remind you, an essential game.
Yeah, you know, I actually kind of needed you to, I was going to ask you to tell me which one it was, but it's just because I don't really associate SNK with sports games, so this seems more on brand.
Yeah, I totally forgot that we had an essential sports game.
Yeah, we have 3 now, if you're counting. Between Baseball Stars, Tecmo Bowl, and if you count Mike Tyson's Punch-Out as a sports game.
Yeah, well, it's Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, I remembered. I actually also forgot Tecmo Bowl was essential.
Maybe you have an agenda.
I tune those episodes out.
Yeah. SNK also so far on the NES has released Alpha Mission. I dare you to tell me one thing about that game.
It was about guns and shooting, likely, and there was definitely a hero.
Okay, good call.
Wasn't that the one that was also known as ASO, Armored Scrum Object in Japan, is a vertically scrolling shooter developed by SNK for arcades in 1985?
You're so right. And yeah, that's correct. It was a shmup. So Sean, you could have just taken the easy guess and just guessed shmup.
Sure.
And that would have been enough for me. But I appreciate the extra effort because you could argue that every ship in a shmup is the hero.
Yeah, in somebody's life.
Right. And then they also released, what do we have here? Iron Tank, The Invasion of Normandy. That was a cool game where you played in the tank.
Oh, yeah. That was
kind of
cool.
like the tank controls.
Yeah. Fun stuff.
Lee Trevino's Fighting Golf.
Oh, yeah. Classic.
Classic Lee Trevino. And then just because I'm listing them all off, the only one that remains, Guerrilla War, which is, in a lot of ways, kind of similar to POW.
Yeah. It's modern warfare, too.
There you go. Yeah. I mean, that was more of a, run and gun, and this is a beat 'em up, but the same style. If you remember that one, Sean, that was the one that had you play as Fidel Castro in the non-NES version.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Yeah, we did make a big deal of all of the political commentary that was just removed because Nintendo had foresight.
And the biggest thing just being that SNK, all of these games are arcade games as well. So it's just, they're not making original games for the NES. They are just bringing over whatever's selling well in the arcades, which is honestly, probably the best strategy by a developer we've seen so far, right? If it's putting quarters in it, it's probably worth making a home console version of it too.
Yeah, you don't even have to really advertise as much. Everybody already knows what the game is, and they probably think it's just as good as in the arcades before they buy it. So, you already got a consumer base.
You cannot go wrong.
We've had a bunch of games where you rescue POWs. Now you finally play as one.
Yeah, where are the rescuers?
No.
Why don't we get to just sit here now while another player rescues us?
We're not some kind of regular old POW.
That's true.
We save ourselves because they didn't check for explosives. If you remember from the beginning of the game.
I do remember from the beginning of the game.
Okay.
It does have some cute cutscenes here and there, but just to jump right into the game, why not? I think we've done enough SNK backstory. POW, Prisoners of War. I don't know if you have to say both. I feel like you could just say one or the other. I'll probably just say POW from this point onwards. It's a beat-em-up game that takes place during the Cold War. Players control the POW who has broken free from their cell to fight their way through the main base and eliminate the person the person who's in charge of the whole war, right? It's it's one thing to be this guy is, the one who locked me up, but it sounds like you're now going to escape jail and then take down an entire country.
That is probably the funniest phrase. And like, I'm here to take down the person responsible for the entire war. Like, who's the manager of this war? I'm going to take him down.
I would like to speak to the manager of this. He really is the Karen.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I was gonna say, I think that it makes you wonder if maybe him becoming a prisoner of war was part of his plan. Like, that was like just to get him on the inside, and then he breaks out.
It was.
Yeah. Is that canon?
That's canon. If you let the start screen just linger for a bit, you get a PowerPoint presentation, like an overhead projector has like some text, and there's like a guy that's describing like, you're gonna be a POW, you're gonna do this.
Well, there you go. I played this game.
Yeah. That's great. It's like that's some movie trailer stuff, though.
It is
right?
cool.
Like, just one problem. He wanted to be caught. Like,
I love that he does have like.
that.
I'm looking at it now. I love that he does have like the elementary school overhead projector.
Exactly.
You can see it there.
So the plot of the game sounds pretty intense to me. How is the game from an intensity point of view? Like, you're alone in enemy ground. Is this a relentless onslaught of like you taking down enemies? And we've seen a lot of other beat 'em ups try to simulate that arcade feeling. So what did you guys just feel about? I said intensity, but really just like the combat experience of the game.
Well, I think it's funny that you led with intensity, because intensity was sort of like the buzzword I had the whole time for like things I wanted to talk about this game. In the sense that, like, yeah, there's always enemies coming at you and whatnot. Like, there's always an onslaught. But something about it feels a little more like, a little less reaction based than a lot of other like beat 'em ups I've played. Like, I'm thinking specifically of like not the Turtles game we played, the other one on the NES I used to play as a kid. Not Turtles
Double
in
Dragon?
Time. No, another Turtles game.
Not
Turtles in Time. The second.
Oh, Turtles in Time.
Not Turtles in Time. Not the Super Nintendo. Whatever. Turtles in Time as well. I'm thinking of those types of games where they feel like very actiony. Feels very like fast paced and like reaction based. Where this, I don't know, it moves a little slower and literally in the way it controls to me. Not necessarily like a horrible thing, but just it didn't feel like relentless action-packedness.
That's interesting that's the way you describe it, because I would say that compared to the last beat 'em up that we played, this feels more classically beat 'em up. And you know me, I have a very short memory and I can't remember the games that we played, but I forgot the name of the last beat 'em up that we played. But like, this one actually has like the sort of cadence and rhythm that I sort of associate with the beat 'em up genre, and felt more like Turtles in Time than a lot of the beat 'em ups that we played so far.
The last beat 'em up we played was Bad Street Brawler.
And there it is, yes.
And there it is, yes.
Okay.
And that was, I would agree that this is a step up both in the combat and in the intensity, like the amount of enemies that they give you. I think my complaint is more of just like a graphical one, that I felt like everything could have just been zoomed in more. There's a lot of empty space on the screen, and most of the action just because it's melee combat, you don't need like a lot of space between enemies. So there's a lot of like walking to the enemy, and it's not like they could throw the knife at you, but then they don't have a knife, and some have guns. But for the most part, there's very little to fill that space. And so I would have just brought everything in a little closer. But in terms of, the waves of enemies and stuff like that, it's all like appropriately spaced. I never felt like I was just like, all right, more of this, more of that. They shake it up every now and again.
Yeah, I sort of agree and sort of disagree. I mean, here's where I think that the reason I think we have maybe different descriptions, at least Sean and I, is because I think that, yes, I am like comparing this to just my general knowledge of beat 'em ups I've played, rather than looking back at most recent beat 'em ups we've played here. In which case, yes, I totally agree that this is closer to Turtles in Time than Bad Street Brawler was, or some of these other beat 'em ups. But I still wouldn't I'm not saying that this is what you were saying, but I still wouldn't consider this close to Turtles in Time at all. Just because I did feel like maybe we did have a different perspective on it, but I did feel like this game just, it feels like a little more like, okay, I see this enemy, I know he's about to do this attack because of his pattern, so I'm gonna move out of the way. And then I see this guy, and but it's like I'm thinking about all that stuff. I'm not just reacting. It's like a little more cerebral because it felt like it moves a little slower. Or like later in the game, I didn't finish it, but I got pretty far. I got to this, I think, the pretty close to the last level. I didn't quite get to it, but later in the game, it's like 3 enemies come on screen, and I have to kick them all to like stop them from moving. As soon as I start kicking them, they don't move, and I just got to kick them all 40 times, and then they'll die. And I was just like, this doesn't feel like I'm jumping around trying to react and like play a beat 'em up. It sounds really negative.
I think what you're describing more is just like a like the difference between Tecmo Bowl feels more like Madden to me than NFL did, and Tecmo Bowl and Madden have really nothing in common, but in terms of like the flow of the game, it felt closer to it. And I guess I'm not saying that this is Turtles in Time, but it shares a lot more of the tropes that I associate with the genre, and it's really just more execution that separates them. And I do agree with you on like the whole like sort of fist sponginess of the enemies, but I think that's more like a that isn't quite the same kind of difference that I would describe.
I think then in that case, I think we're on the same page. I think we're just like looking at it. We're each comparing it to different things and then looking at it from that perspective.
You know, beat 'em ups have this progression of locking the screen once you hit a certain point until you take out the enemies. And in Bad Street Brawler, I saw that as like a real problem, as like the flow of that game. Here, I would agree that it takes in unnecessary amount of hits, depending on, you know, if you're just punching the enemies. It does take a while to knock them out successfully, but for the most part, they don't fill the screen with like an unnecessary amount of enemies, and they find creative ways to change up the enemies between levels too. So I feel like there is, from a flow standpoint, it feels more like the arcade style game where you're moving, but you know, you're moving progressively and things are getting harder, the stakes are getting bigger, rather than just, and here's 3 more green guys, and then here's 3 pink guys, and then here's 3 blue guys. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like when we talk about platformers, like, are they just throwing enemies anywhere, or did they think about who should come where and what's good game design?
The one thing that I would say about the whole start and stop of it and the distribution of enemies is that this is sort of a nitpick, but it just felt very awkward. Like how often, and because when I think to like the classic beat 'em up games, like there are very obvious like arenas. Like you're going to like the screen's gonna stop and you're going to fight in this alleyway. And it like there's sort of like an internal consistency as to like what this alleyway fight is going to look like, and then you're going to clear the stage or the stage part, and you're going to move forward, and then you can kind of guess that like, oh, something's going to happen around here. Whereas in this one, in POW, you're going to clear the area, and then you're going to move like 5 feet. And then it's going to stop again because I just decided to throw an extra guy your way. I don't know if you guys felt the same way, that it just felt a little inconsistent.
Yeah, it even felt inconsistent in the regards that sometimes the screen, like you would see enemies, but the screen wouldn't lock off. You could continue to skip them.
Yeah, it's very strange decision making. I don't know if it's just like there's like a limit, like once it hits 3 enemies on the screen, then it will lock, or if like, it's something like that, or if it was actually authored that way. It just felt like there wasn't a lot of consistency there.
Yeah, I agree. It was a little jarring sometimes, where it's like, oh, I just went a long time without the screen locking. Now it just locked 5 times in a row, and like I didn't get anywhere.
And it is a nitpick, but like it also like has a very strong like correlation with the flow of the game, which like in a beat 'em up, like the flow is kind of everything.
Yeah. No, I hear you. And I think that for me, what it was that that bothered me, and I realize I'm being very negative on the game. I don't think there's I don't have. I have positive thoughts about this game too, but just as we're talking about it, the one the one thing that about that screen locking that threw me off a lot was, first of all, in order to move the screen forward, you have to be pretty far to the right as it is,
Yes.
not giving you a lot of room to see in front of you. And then when the screen locks, you might end up even further to the right, like right up on it. And as soon as the screen unlocks, now that's the point where the screen moves, and you have to kind of like backtrack in order to like get to a point where you can kind of see something. It sounds like very much a nitpick. It did get a little annoying sometimes. It was like, I want to keep going, but like I got to kind of find the spot that's like the right spot.
I know we're getting into the weeds here, but I will agree and say that I think what happens is if the screen unlocks and you're already moving to the right, it will not unlock and allow you to keep moving forward until you like release the button and then press it again. That's sort of what I gathered. But this is a very specific thing.
Yeah. It's a very specific thing that was noticeable a lot, though. So I feel like if you play the game, you will notice it.
Yeah, I think it's all good to get into this because we really are just talking about the combat here and all the various nuances that might go into that. Because I even wanted to bring up, you only have punch, kick, and jump kick as your 3 attacks. And yeah, you can pick up a knife and you can pick up a machine gun and occasionally it lets you throw a grenade. But that's really that's it. And I feel like going off of a game such as Double Dragon, they found creative ways to involve grappling and other types of attacks. Here, punch and kick are also just like less powerful than jump kick. So it's another one of these games. We had this before with a different brawler. Maybe it was Bad Dudes, where jump kick is just the default best option if you can land it because it's the most powerful attack. So why would you choose to like stun an enemy for longer with a punch when you can jump kick at them?
Yeah, because it also creates space to deal, because you're more than likely going to be dealing with several enemies at a time, and if you do the jump kick, you're guaranteed to knock them back, even when like a punch or a kick has a chance to knock them back. And it's just an interesting thing when in this game, like there's this. It's like the opposite of power creep, where at the beginning of the game, it feels very balanced, where you kind of have an idea that this amount of attacks is going to down an opponent, and this amount and then this amount of attacks is going to eliminate an opponent. And then just as you keep moving forward, that number just keeps climbing and gets to the point, like how Joe said, you gotta kick or punch some guy and stun lock them for 40 hits before you end it, unless you've got a gun. And yeah, there is the power up for the brass knuckles to sort of, I guess, cut that number in half. But as the game goes on, the combat, which at first felt very natural, now feels very grindy.
Yeah, and I mean, there are some standout moments too, just to get away from the negative talk for a minute. I do feel like in stage 2, when I first saw the frogmen, I think they're described in the manual, but they're the divers who go underwater. That was a really cool moment where you see them, they're not just like visually popping up from the water. First they enter the water, and then it's like, where'd they go? And then they slowly come out of the water. It's not the most fair thing in the world because they could show up anywhere, but it was a cool moment where all of a sudden it's a very tense situation between you and 3 known divers.
I agree with that.
And I think that excuse me, if you can't tell, I'm sick. So if this is your first episode, I don't normally sound like this, but that kind of speaks to like, I think this whole overall thing that they do right, which is enemy variety, which like we see enemy variety done on like a whole spectrum of like from well done to poorly done. But I think sometimes even when it's done well, the different enemies are like not too different to deal with. Whereas in this case, I think they put a lot of thought into how to make these enemies, like, you have to think about them differently, like these frogmen that are gonna, it's like they come down, okay, they're there. Now you have to, like, it's basically like a reaction game for a second where you have to, like, wait, see where they're gonna pop up and, like, try and react quickly before they get the jump on you. And you know, that's a cool different way of thinking about it. There are these other enemies that like jump around, and you have to like they take like one hit to kill, but you have to like kind of catch them where they're gonna land. And like that's the only instance where that happens, but it just like it's a little breakup from just like, oh yeah, just punch this guy over and over again, you know? Even like the enemies with the knives, you have to approach differently than the enemies with the guns and stuff like that. So it's like I think they did a good job with kind of keeping you on your toes with that stuff without making it like feel ridiculous.
Yeah, I do like the enemy variety that they have there, and the like you've got gun guys, you got the frogmen, which I think we're just gonna say divers because I don't. The frogmen is just a very strange word. The knife guys, the motorcycle guys, which you're better off just like avoiding, unless you have a knife to throw and you want to get rid of. The grenade dudes, like there's a whole like 5-pointed triangle of like the enemies you have to deal with and the skills that you have to use to dispatch them accordingly. But I also think that their boss fights are pretty well designed as well. I don't know if we want to move on to that already.
Let's move into that.
Yeah. So the very first boss that you fight, I was a pretty big fan of because it's just it's a huge helicopter. You fight a helicopter, and it's odd to fight a helicopter as a mainly melee-based hero, but in this situation, there's several ways you can approach it. If you came prepared and you're still holding a gun, then you can kind of just like cheese it and destroy it while not really having to deal with anything else. But if you were, not prepared, and this is your first run through or whatever, you will have to dispatch it another way. And the thing about this fight is that it's also going to continue to spawn enemies that have grenades, and it will continue to do that forever. I only mention that because the first time I fought this thing, I thought that I just had to dispatch all the enemies, and I didn't know that my main target was the helicopter, so I was fighting it forever. But then when you figure it out, like then you've got all these enemies dropping grenades when you kill them, and now you're using those grenades to attack the helicopter. And I just really liked that whole, like, there's several ways to go about it, and also it's not just a punch until dead or shoot until dead situation. It's actually sort of built into like the world of the game.
Yeah, I totally agree. I thought it was a really it was a good like boss pattern too, or like boss pattern combined with like the means that it gives you to deal with the boss. That felt, I feel like a lot of these older like NES games, the boss battles feel like they've aged very poorly because it is what you said. It is like, okay, yeah, just shoot until it's dead and don't get shot. It's gonna keep shooting at you. Not all of them, but a lot of them do that. And this one had a good pattern that you kind of.
It felt more Metal Gear than like Metal Gear Solid with like its very unique bosses, as opposed to any number of games that we played on this system, where it's just you're gonna keep doing what you've been doing.
There's a cool fight with it's like a giant. I'm gonna describe. It seems like he's like a Russian wrestler, but he's also like one of those circus men. He just has like a huge stomach,
Angel,
and no shirt on. Is that what it is?
The big round guy, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. That's Angel.
Okay, cool. He's got a name. Great.
Yeah.
I like that fight because it's in an elevator, and it's very cramped corners, and he's obviously this bigger, stronger, more intimidating dude than you, but you can't go anywhere, so you have to do the combat. And like, yeah, the combat's not the best in this game, but it's just another way that they tried to do a different kind of fight in this game where they didn't change any of the controls between levels or fights or anything like that.
Yeah. No, it just like, yeah, putting these bosses in different settings, like different circumstances, so that you're not just doing the same loop over and over. Like you're still adjusting to these new enemies. I appreciate that.
And the manager at the end of the game, the one who's responsible for the war, I don't know if he is single-handedly responsible for the war, but I will say that he has a weird attack pattern where he seems to be just like another guy who just happens to also be like 8'5", and he does front flips and back flips as his movement, like consistently, just nonstop. I'm not sure like if that was the best thing to like showcase as the final fight. Like I'm sure it was tough to deal with that, but he doesn't like backflip any further. It's kind of predictable how far he will flip. It feels like almost when you deal with like a Mega Man or a Super Mario World mini boss, you know, where like you learn their pattern pretty fast, and then it's like, okay, cool, I know where they're gonna be. It didn't feel that like climactic at the end after all these fights. I mean, you fight a tank at one point with your bare fists.
Yeah. I actually did not make it to the end of this game because of like sort of the difficulty curve. But I have watched a video and it did look underwhelming.
It is funny though to see this guy who is just like looks way too big to have any business being as acrobatic as he is. But he's like jumping like a mile in the air doing backflips.
It's funny though too, because like in the manual it describes the height and weight of every character in the game for some reason, and it like he actually is 8'5" or something. it like it's not just like, oh, we made this sprite too big or whatever. Like, that's to scale.
That's classic. Sean, you mentioned that the game gets tougher. You know, can you talk about that a little bit? What about it gets tougher? Is it that the enemies have significantly more HP?
Yeah.
Or yeah, okay, go.
It's almost 100% like an HP scaling thing. Like, and they're not like their attack patterns aren't getting like more elaborate. They're not that they don't like maybe they do cause more damage as well, but it's really just everyone becomes a bullet sponge, and I find that sort of to be a bit too artificial to be like, oh, there's like a skill curve. It's just you have to have the endurance and I guess the like combat awareness to be able to deal with all these like much more enduring enemies. So your mode of play is probably going to change to more of like a crowd control sort of thing, but where you're just gonna sort of hit and run. I don't know how you guys like changed your approach as the game went forward, but I don't know. I would have preferred the enemies to become just harder in like harder to deal with, just because they had more of a move set and not just because they took more punches or kicks to get rid of.
Yeah, especially because, you know, like I said before, the way that I sort of dealt with it was kind of the opposite of hit and run, but it was definitely less fun because I would try and find ways to get like 3 enemies in one spot, and then your kick can kind of hit all 3 of them. And as long as you just keep kicking, you've locked them. They're like, for the most part, I mean, once in a while they'll break out, but for the most part, they're stuck while you kick them for a really long time. Like it's kind of boring. And then yeah, sometimes like another enemy will come in and you have to like think about that enemy, but like that's not a fun loop.
Yeah, and I think the stun thing is a cool gameplay aspect because that, you know, it would suck if you punch, they punch. We've seen games like that where it's just you and the enemy in a fist punching war, and whoever like happens to have more HP comes out the winner. It does help, but I would agree that not even just the stun locks, but when you hit them and they go flying, that should be when they're done. You know, like they're dead, and instead, maybe it was designed for a crowd control kind of thing, but instead it's just like, I'm not having my eye on them any longer, but then sure enough, like they get back up and come right over to me again. And it's like, when do I know whether they're dead or not? Because I'm also dealing with a bunch of other guys on the screen.
Yeah, and then the weird thing about it is that I feel like usually when that happened, like when they go flying that first time and they're still alive, they just take one more hit after that.
Oh.
Like, it's not even like that's like the halfway point, unless you guys notice differently. But I notice it's like after like 20 hits, they go flying, and then they get back up, and like I'm like, oh, okay, round 2, and it's just like one more hit, and they go flying again and are dead.
Well, it's a stamina thing, right? It's like boxing when you get knocked down the first time, and then you get the 10 count. When you come back up, if you take like another hit, you're gonna go right back down.
That's true. That's true.
We've been talking mostly about the combat because that is what this game is. You know, at the end of the day, there isn't like puzzles. There's barely any pickups. There are rooms that you go into to fight smaller batches of enemies to acquire pickups. But for the most part, this is the game. I wanted to ask you guys, just from a setting and thematic storytelling point of view, what'd you think of the actual like stages and the progression of the story? Did it feel movie-like and that it was getting bigger, or was it just the same scenery over and over again?
I mean, I think that the little cutscenes that are played between each level were charming. It's very 80s. It's very action movie. I wouldn't say that it's all that engaging in terms of like what's going to happen next. Like obviously you're going to win, but I think there is there's some good like level variety. Like I mean, it's not entirely unique. There's a jungle level, a prison level, I guess a industrial level. But there's enough that it doesn't feel like everything is the same. It's just we've seen it all before in some other context.
There is something weird here, though, about beat 'em ups for me personally, that we spend so much time talking about the combat, but in a game like Ninja Gaiden, we would have talked about the combat, and then we would have talked about so many other aspects of the same game, too. And beat 'em ups are just like one very honed in, focused part of what essentially every NES platformer can also offer you. So for me, what made Double Dragon stand out was the destructible environments and being able to like pick up objects that you found and stuff. Here, other than like picking up a knife that they had in their hands, that if you punch them and they're lucky enough to drop it, you can pick up that knife. Otherwise, there's not a lot of interactability or even...
Well, there is one thing. Like,
go for it.
One thing that I would say that POW does to remove itself from just being a cookie cutter beat 'em up is that throughout each level, you're going to find these little optional caves or shipping containers or whatever contextually they are, but these little nooks that you can move off into that once you clear that space, you will get a power-up. And you're obviously sort of trading off the risk of losing HP or even losing a life by going into them because you're fighting an optional mob for the reward of either like brass knuckles or an armor vest or whatever the third thing is. And these all have very useful attributes to them. And I think that does make it unique in at least one way.
No, and that's true because that wasn't in the arcade version.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those things, like, I think it's really, it's a well done risk versus reward because some of those rooms are very difficult, but those power ups are worth it. Like if you can come out with the armor, like that means any projectile will just bounce off of you for the rest of the level, or when you lose your life. Like that's really powerful, but it feels like a perfect. It's not like overpowered because it's only projectile weapons, and it feels like a perfect balance of like. It really does make me think when I come across those. Like there's some tough enemies in those sometimes in those little nooks. So like I have to kind of decide on the fly like how worth it is this is this armor, and it's not always a no-brainer, which I think is a great thing for a game like this.
On the arcade side, I did play the arcade game because I heard good things about it. There are 3 special attacks that can be performed by pressing 2 of the buttons simultaneously. So there's a jump kick, a back punch, and a headbutt. So there are 3 buttons. There's a kick button, a punch button, and a jump button. In this game, we don't get a separate jump button for the NES version, but you can still jump nonetheless with the jump kick. My point being here is, do you think that it matters at all that, we only had 3 options in this game, but even the arcade version kind of knew that wasn't enough?
Well, you actually can back punch in this game, and I didn't find out until like my last 5 minutes of playing this game when I accidentally did it. But if you just hit the D-pad in the direction that you want to back punch and the punch button at like the perfect timing, he'll do like a backhand.
Yeah. And I was able to discover that and use it like on purpose. But it is a very niche use. Like you're not always going to need to use that because you're probably going to position yourself in a way that has all of your enemies on the same side.
Well, it also felt like it doesn't take enough time to turn around that it makes a back punch worth it. like the whole game, I was just, someone comes up behind me, I just turn that way and punch. And then like one time and notice I can back punch. And I'm like, but does this save me time even? I mean, it didn't even really seem like it. So it felt kind of arbitrary.
And then one last thing about the game that I feel like we should talk about, that I actually don't mind this in these video games, is when the ending can't spell congratulations correctly. We've seen it so many times now. And I know it's like, it's a joke and people usually like laugh about it. And there's probably like someone should make a coffee table book of all the mistranslations of congratulations or some kind of you win in video games because there's winner is you and stuff like that. I just feel like it's not that big of a deal, right? In 2022, like you see congratulations and you're like, whatever. Like it doesn't even feel like that big of a moment anyway because the screen just fades to black from the final boss fight and then you're randomly with some chick that I guess, hopefully you're back in, the US and you're with your lady or whatever and now there's it's just like, I don't know. I didn't really care
it's
about
done.
the ending.
It's done.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we laughed about it throughout all of the aughts, and now it's 2022, and like it's just not the joke anymore. So yeah, it's fine. It's funny. It's like a chuckle moment, but I don't think we're gonna make a whole video about it, like video game nerd or whatever.
I feel like, Mike, you brought that up to be like, all right, everybody, grow up.
I think congratulation could be congratulation, like you've graduated from the game.
Wow, maybe that's what they were trying to do, and
Just
they
a
spelled
mix.
that wrong.
Yeah, portmanteau.
Yeah, exactly. And I do plenty of those while we record these episodes. So I'm saying, don't make fun of people for the way they say or spell things.
I'm still gonna do it.
Please do. On the sequels and spin-off side here, I just wanted to talk about the SNK 40th Anniversary Collection, something that we've mentioned a few times now. If you don't get the hint, it's a really nice collection on, I think, Switch, PS4, very well detailed, made by a lot of the people who actually work at the video game preservation museum and all that. Yeah, so it was a lot of love was put into that, but this game is playable there, both the NES version and the arcade version, so you can do like we did and switch between them and see the differences. But there are no actual like sequels or spin-offs to Prisoners of War, which at first I thought was strange, but SNK doesn't really even have that many beat 'em ups. So if you were into this game, the only other options really there for you are games like Burning Fight, Mutation Nation, Sengoku, and Street Smart are like the top SNK
I haven't heard
beat 'em
of
ups.
any of those.
Yeah, I haven't heard of any of them either, but apparently Burning Fight is a really good Neo Geo beat 'em up that SNK made.
Okay.
So that's my like sequels and spin-off section for you guys. Usually it's a lot more detailed, and this game kind of feels like, because we've had so many games that either you're rescuing prisoners of war or they're in a warlike setting like this, I feel like a lot of these games and tropes just kind of blend in together. So if this kind of game was for you, there's more than enough even on this system for you to continue to explore. Anyway, we're done with Prisoners of War. Would you say that that's true?
I'd say that's... Well,
I'm
don't we usually do something else?
We usually do something else. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We're not quite done. There's something that we do. Sean, what do we do?
We take a look at the game code and see what we can like take out of it. And learn from it.
Oh, right. I didn't talk about the memory mappers yet.
Yeah, you need to talk about the memory map.
Right. Yeah. Oh, no. You know what, though? That's not it either. Joe, what do we do at the end of an episode?
let me check my
games
script
list.
real quick. What? No, you had your shot.
All right. It's time for the Essential Games List. Sean, as always, you will go first.
Yeah, sometimes, but that's fine. I mean, yeah, I think we did a pretty good mix of good and bad for this game. Again, great boss design. With like, even though a lot about this game is kind of just trope central. Like we've seen portions of this game everywhere. It's not unique in kind of any way, but when we put all the pieces together, this is like a pretty good game. Like I would recommend this for fans of beat 'em ups, but it has enough wrong with it, and those things that are wrong aren't just nitpicks. Like it does become a drag just to fight in this game about fighting. So I can't put it on the essential games list, but I do think that it has a lot going for it.
Yeah, I actually really enjoyed this game at first, and I'll even go as far as say it's better than its arcade, original. Like, yeah, that has 2 players, so that's definitely, like, if that's the kind of thing you enjoy, and I do think beat 'em ups are probably better with 2 players, or if you can even get games like X-Men or The Simpsons where you can have 4, obviously that's a different kind of experience, but just on the single-player level, I enjoyed the NES game more than the arcade version, and I thought this game was really serviceable until I went back to Double Dragon, our actual beat 'em up essential game. And you're allowed to have more than one in a particular genre, but it just seems like, Double Dragon was so long ago now, and I feel like Prisoners of War tried to, either like learn something from it, but didn't take away like the right lessons. And I'm looking for that kind of game that improves upon Double Dragon, because Double Dragon's like the Super Mario Brothers of the beat 'em up genre for me right now. It lays down the groundwork. There's definitely room for improvement, but I feel like these kinds of games where it doesn't have all of the checkboxes that Double Dragon fulfills, it's like they can't quite make it there yet because they are a little outdated now. They don't have enough going for them in 2022, and that's ultimately what the Essential Games list is about. So I agree with Sean. I think it's a play it for fans of beat 'em ups, but if you're looking for like games that you must play, I don't think it's quite there. What about you, Joe?
Well, yeah, right out of the gate, I'm going to say that I definitely agree that it's at least a play it. It's got some, like I said, the enemy variety, just the boss designs and everything. It's got some, it does things, it does a lot of things well. But the thing that it immediately comes down to for me as far as putting on the Essential Games list is actually what I brought up at the beginning, which is something about this game just doesn't feel like it's action-packed enough, or like, not that it has to be action-packed, but like, as far as a beat 'em up goes, I want it to be reaction based. I want to be excited, and I'm just not getting that out of this. And that, coupled with some of the other things you guys mentioned, like how later in the game people just become these bullet sponges. It feels like, it's funny. I've been kind of like, I keep flirting with this same phrase the last few times something has been like we've been talking about Essential Games, of like the idea that this game didn't do anything wrong. It just didn't like do anything right enough. And I think like to boil that down a little more is that like, I'll say that it didn't age well. Not in the sense that like, wow, it's so broken now because like we didn't know how to make good game controls back then. It's more that it's like just games in this genre have gotten more fun since, in my opinion. Not even like very recently, like even just probably, a few years after this, or like, Super Nintendo days. I think about playing that, and they learned to get to be more fun, in a way that like this game probably wasn't doing anything wrong, but it just isn't at that level yet because it doesn't have the experience from the past to draw on or something. So in the end, I think that this game is fun in the context of when it came out, and is still fun enough now if you want to go back and play a beat 'em up and just have a good time, but not fun enough to be on the Essential Games list.
All right, and there you have it. 3 no's, but also 3 play-its. So take that for what you will. Definitely, I was surprised by the game just because SNK has had a mixed output on the NES so far. Next week, we will be playing the opposite of a beat 'em up in Sesame Street ABC. I can't think of anything further away from
Big hype.
Yeah, exactly. We played Sesame Street 1, 2, 3. They decided to skip 4, 5, 6 and go right to ABC. We'll see how it is. And, I'm sure it'll be a much heated discussion, just like how 1, 2, 3 was. Now, if you're saying, how could that have had a heated discussion? You guys are going to waste my time. We're not going to waste your time because, trust me, if you go back to that Sesame Street 1, 2, 3 episode, that could have been the last episode of the podcast. I don't know if me and Sean have ever fully talked about that after the record.
No. We don't want to. You don't want to bring up bad blood.
Exactly.
Well,
so
get ready for next week.
Sesame Street 1, 2, 3 is essential listening to prepare for next week's Sesame Street ABC. In the meantime, if you're looking for even more nostalgia, don't forget about the Twitter at NostalgiaCast or the website, nostalgiacast.com. If you want even more than that, God bless you, because we actually have a Patreon account now, and we have another show on there called Nostalgia Bites, where we do Famicom games. We have 5 episodes of that so far, so as soon as you join, you get access to 5 new episodes of Nostalgia that you have never heard anywhere else, and all sorts of other goodies, too. We were giving away stickers. We talk about what we've been playing. We have a private Discord. Think about that. You know you want in on that. If you said right now, hard pass, just tweeted us telling us which one of us you don't like enough that you would rather not be on the Discord with us.
And we'll leave.
And tell me why it's me.
No.
Like, I'm trying to practice self-improvement. I'm trying to become a better person.
Sesame Street can also teach you about those things, Sean.
But I got to get through the ABCs first.
Yeah.
Right.
Also,
ABC's first, being a good person second.
wait, speaking of which, though, Mike, you said that they skipped 4, 5, 6 and went straight to ABC. Did you expect them to go through all the numbers before they went to letters?
At least through like 9, 11, 12.
9, 11,
I would say
12?
even to
No
even
10?
to 0, Sesame Street 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then Sesame Street 0 being like the reboot of the series.
I don't even remember
Sesame Street 0.
missing
I
10.
love that.
Anyway, bye.